think I saw something like since January, us and them have the best records in the NBA. They play fast. They're stubborn in the way they play. They play like that no matter the game, no matter the environment, no matter the round or stage. They play to their identity.
On the surface, I could easily come out and just say, look, the Indiana Pacers have no shot. Oklahoma City Thunder is going to sweep them out of the playoffs. It's not going to be interesting. But I have to admit to you, I've been picking other teams to beat Indiana Pacers in the playoffs from last year. They beat the Knicks and the Bucks and made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. At that point, I said, okay, the Celtics are going to beat them. But I didn't think they would be in the conference finals. Again, we're talking about last year. And so to see them in the NBA Finals this year, not just the Eastern Conference, and they beat the Knicks and the Bucks in different rounds this year, but still those same two teams, I have to give them their credit and talk about them. And this video, I'll make a case as to how they could beat the Oklahoma City Thunder. I don't think it's going to happen, but let's really dive into this team and see what they could do.
Phil Jackson did something I've never seen done before. If they can be a threat, he will put threat. For example, Siakam as the player is, but they didn't take him as a threat tonight.
Here's what I'll say with Pascal. They don't run plays for him. So he got it in transition.
That's my point.
He came and got the switch and took advantage of the switch. So it's a lot harder to key on that.
Let's start there with what Draymond Green had to say about Pascal Siakam. He's absolutely right. If you're guarding somebody and they're not getting set plays ran for them, then it's less about strategy and more about your effort and concentration. And with a guy like Pascal Siakam, he led the Pacers in points per game with about 20 for the regular season. Tyrese Halliburton was right behind him with 18, and then he dishes the 9 assists. But if we're talking purely scoring, Pascal Siakam is the best Pacers player. But credit to Rick Carlisle, he didn't just do a whole offensive scheme around Pascal Siakam where Halliburton getting Siakam the ball and then him going one-on-one and trying to get his buckets. They rely solely on everything from their starting lineup to their bench, which I'll get into a little bit later.
Do you ever say to yourself, man, if they actually have a round to play for me, I could do this every night?
That's not who we are, man. At the end of the day, the team knows, coach knows, and you know that's the identity that we've had, you know, since I've been here.
Basically, if they did run plays for Pascal Siakam, he would average about 25 points per game easily. That is not the case. So if we're going off of what Draymond Green had to say, then it may be harder for a team like OKC, though they're one of the top defensive teams, to guard another team where it's not just one pure scorer. You're not zoning in on just a Nikola Jokic or maybe even a Jamal Murray or just an Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle. You got to worry about 1 through 5 and then the bench. Now, conventional wisdom says normally when you have a team like the Pacers, relying on a bunch of other players to score who are not superstars, eventually that's going to come to haunt you because you're going to expect them to have a big game and they're not going to be able to do it. You need someone who's reliable to score at any given time and get you 25 to 30. However, the Pacers are defying those odds, and even though the Thunder themselves have individual defenders that can guard a Siakam or a Halliburton, here's an example that happened with the Knicks series why that may not matter as much and the Thunder may still have some trouble.
I kind of feel like sometimes when I watch Cat and Jalen Brunson, I wonder if that's a little bit of fool's gold, right? Obviously, I know what Cat can do offensively, but where they were defensively is the problem. Now, look, last night, 17 turnovers, 22 points in transition for Indy. But there were so many times, Doggy and SA, where I watched where Cat wasn't even in the screen defensively when these possessions were going through and how fast these fast breaks were.
I understand the OKC Thunder don't have any defensive liabilities to the equivalence of Karl Anthony Towns or Jalen Brunson. The reason why I played that clip, and go back and listen to really what Jay Will is saying here, he's talking about the pace, fast break, and specifically Karl Anthony Towns not getting back on defense. When I look at the OKC Thunder, I look at two individuals, Chet Holmgren and specifically Isaiah Hartenstein. How are they going to look a little bit more or a lot more sped up in the offense where now they really got to get back? You see, it's one thing to be a really solid defensive team in the half court. It's another whole ball game when you got to be a good defensive team in open space while on the move. Let me emphasize once more, this point I'm making is about Chet Holmgren and especially Isaiah Hartenstein. Again, not to say that they're bad defenders, I'm just talking about the style of play that they are going to have to adjust to now that they're going up against the Indiana Pacers. Now, when it comes to Hartenstein, let me show you some plays of how Miles Turner was able to exploit Brook Lopez in their series when the Pacers were facing the Bucks and how that may affect Hartenstein if he ends up having to guard him. As you see on these plays, the Pacers targeted a good defender in Brook Lopez and put him in the pick and roll every single time. And it's either Brook Lopez was just out of the play and completely left Miles Turner, or he was dropped back a little bit too far. Either way, I wonder if OKC is going to have to go small in order for a situation like this not to happen. With Hartenstein, we'll see. My final reason why the Indiana Pacers could upset the OKC Thunder is the bench. And I mentioned it earlier in the video. Let's get into it now. When I look at the OKC Thunder, who they got coming off their bench, it's really a bunch of defenders. Aaron Wiggins could give you 10 to 12 points. Outside of that, I'm looking at Isaiah Joe, Alex Caruso. These guys, they're defenders, right? This is their identity and what they built themselves on. But with the Pacers, it's straight offense. Something got to give. You got a bunch of scorers coming off the bench versus a bunch of guys who just want to play defense. TJ McConnell could give you about 10 points, 5 assists. Obi Toppin could give you about 10 points. Benedict Mathurin was scoring almost 20 points per game coming off the bench this regular season for the Indiana Pacers. He's been a bit up and down, but in his recent games, it looked like he came back to form. I'm just saying, if the Indiana Pacers want to pull this off, which I think they can, it got to be pace and space, and you got to beat them off of your depth. That is how they're going to win this series. I would still give it to OKC. Ultimately, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander being the MVP. If I had to put money on it, I would give it to OKC. But I'm not going to underestimate this Pacers team anymore. And one last thing, if you look at all the NBA Finals appearances and the teams that made it, starting from the year 2000 up until now, there's not a lot of teams where there was no MVP or face of the league player that ended up going to the finals. Ironically, in 2000, I would put the Indiana Pacers team of that time in that category. Reggie Miller was their best player, but even when he was in his prime, he wasn't seen as that level player that I'm talking about with the Michael Jordans or even the Charles Barkleys. And then if you look at, let's say, the New Jersey Nets a couple years after that, making back-to-back finals, the Detroit Pistons team in 2004, and maybe a couple of those Miami Heat teams with Jimmy Butler. Outside of those few teams that I mentioned, every other single team had a clear-cut MVP, Hall of Fame level player. What I'm trying to say is Indiana Pacers have pulled off something that doesn't happen a lot. It's very rare. And if you want to take it a step further, out of those teams that I mentioned, there was only one who won the championship that didn't have that, let's say, top 5 player in the league or MVP candidate, just to be more specific so people aren't confused by what I'm saying. The Indiana Pacers are in a rare category right now. Y'all let me know in the comment section what you think. Give me your own analysis of how you see the series going. All right, like, share, and subscribe. And as always, salute for listening. Peace.